we were still doing clockwise like this, and instead of going into the overhand side plane meltdown here, we were looking at turning left into the underhand side plane meltdown here. Just to preview it again, we're here in the clockwise hip rail. And then what we're gonna do is turn. So if we do it this way, when the right hand is behind, the left hand will be in front, but then as you turn, the left hand will be crossing to the right side of the body, and you'll be like this, which means you'll then come into it, bringing the right hand from the back to the front and the left hand to the back. Okay, so if that's the version of that we're doing, let's do the left hand alone. So you're here going front to back. Now when it's on the front, you're gonna turn, and then when you turn, you're gonna go from crossing in front of your body to crossing behind your body, and that's the first maneuver you're make with your left hand. So you're here like this, and then it's in front. 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're going to turn on the 1 and then turn, and then you cross behind. Cross in front, cross behind, cross in front, cross behind. Now turn back to the hip rail. 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're going to turn and cross behind, cross in front, cross behind, cross in front, and back to the hip rail. And 5, 6, 7, 8, and cross behind, cross in front, cross behind, cross in front, and now back to the hip rail. 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and cross behind and in front and behind and back to the hip rail. 5, 6, 7, 8, and cross behind, turning and front, behind and front, and now go back to the hip rail. 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and then cross behind as you turn, and then in front and behind and in front. So for this one, we're doing it when the right hand is behind, and then what's going to happen is you're going to turn to here, and then it'll come to the front while the left one is moving. So you're here, you turn, and as you turn left, you come to the front with the right hand, then back behind, then the front, then back behind. So from the hip rail, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're going to turn and then cross in front and cross behind. Cross in front, cross behind. Now we're going to come back to the hip rail, and 5, 6, 7, 8, and then behind, turn and cross in front, behind, in front, behind. Now let's try the two-handed hip rail. Let's see if you can just fall into it this time. So we're in the hip rail, and 5 and 6 and 7 and turning, and right behind, left in front, and now we switch them, and switch, and switch, and switch, and back to hip rail. And 5, 6, 7, 8. Now turning, and 5, 6, 7, turn back to the hip rail, and 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and turn, and right cross it to the front, 6, and 7, and 8, and turn to the hip rail, and 5, 6, 7, 8, and we'll turn, and right comes to the front, left goes to the back, and you're switching, switching. Here is what might have been confusing. I think when we did it last week, I showed you both versions of it, which might have created some confusion, because with this one, I had you turn when the right hand was behind, but you could turn when you're like this, right? So if you're, instead of turning here when the right is behind, if you turn when the left is behind, then the left one's going to cross to the other side, which might be a more complicated turn. You have, I know you have done this one that we just did. We're going into the underhand. And then I know that you have gone into the overhand. So what you can try doing now is just from your hip rail, turn left to the side plane underhand meltdown, turn right to the hip rail, then turn right again to the overhand side plane meltdown, then turn left to the hip rail, then turn left to the underhand side plane meltdown, then turn right to the hip rail, then turn right to the overhand side plane meltdown, and then turn left back to the hip rail, and so on. And then you can go between them. Meltdown, hip rail, side plane meltdown to the hip rail, side plane meltdown to the hip rail, side plane meltdown to the hip rail. Instead of when you turn right going into the overhand meltdown side plane, and and then turning back to the hip reel, it looked like what you were trying to do, unintentionally maybe, going from the overhand meltdown here to the underhand side plane meltdown here, back to the overhand side plane meltdown here, and you're basically ignore the hip reel in the middle, which you can do, but you can think of it, it's kind of like, if you think about opposite direction like this, and then you go through butterfly, and then you're in opposite direction like this, and then you go through butterfly, it's like skipping the butterfly in the middle and going from one side to the other, only we're doing this with the side plane meltdown in the same direction versus the side plane opposite direction. And that's just skipping the hip reel in the middle. I think what might be helpful is if we did this little drill. If you take your right hand and you look at it, you're going behind like this and then in front like this, across. So these are both crossing motions. If you bring it here to the crossing position and then just rotate 90, you can stop at the hip reel. If you bring it here to the crossing position and then keep going another 90 degrees and keep crossing, that's what you're doing. That now you're set up for this version of it. Whether or not you're stopping in the middle, right? Because this to this, to this, to this, to this, right? I'm stopping here. I'm stopping. I'm stopping. I'm stopping. That's not the side plane meltdown. The side plane meltdown skips that place where you stop, and you're in continuous crossovers. The opposite version, where you're trying to go from underhands, side plane meltdown like this, and you're turning the full 180 to the overhand side plane meltdown here. Back to the underhand, to the overhand, to the underhand, to the overhand. So you're here, right? And then you can turn the other way to get here. Or you can turn this way to get here. Let's start here in the counterclockwise hip reel. And then let's turn to the left. When you turn to the left, that's going to go into the overhand side plane meltdown. And let's see if you can fall into that one. Okay, let's drill your left hand a couple times just to make sure it feels good. So you're going front to back, and now when you turn, cross behind, front, behind, front, behind. So this one, the awkward turn is when you get to here, you keep going to this side behind you, which can feel a little awkward in the beginning. And then you can practice doing the four-way turn. So what I mean by the four-way turn is if we start in counterclockwise here, turn one is going left to the overhand side plane meltdown. The next 90-degree turn will bring you, from the artist perspective, into the clockwise hip reel. The next 90-degree turn will bring you into the underhand side plane meltdown. And then the next 90-degree turn will bring you back to where you started. And then practice before going this way, where you go back to the underhand side plane meltdown, back to the clockwise hip reel, back to the overhand side plane meltdown, and then going back to the and then going back to the counterclockwise hip reel. And then you can practice the two, well, I guess technically the two pairs of 180s. So from here, I could turn 180 into this hip reel, and then I can turn 180 into this hip reel, and 180 into this hip reel. Or I could turn the right turn 180, or the right turn 180, or the right turn 180. And then from here, I can turn the left turn 180 to the underhand side plane meltdown, and then the left turn 180 back to the overhand. Or I can turn the right turn 180 to the underhand side plane meltdown, and I can do the other 180 to go back this way. So it's 4 90-degree turns left, 4 90-degree turns right, and then you have the two pairs of 180-degree turns, either from the wall plane hip reel move or from the side plane meltdown move. So, you know, my whole thing about companion moves, like the overhand weave and the underhand weave, they are companions. You could do the 360 with them. This is the same thing. So the clockwise and counterclockwise hip reel is a pair of companions on the wall plane, and then the side plane meltdown and overhand and underhand are the companion pairs on the side plane.